Hey, good morning, y'all. Josh's Severe Weather. Happy Tuesday to you, the 20th of June. A lot of this video is going to talk about a very quick start to the tropical season and what we're going to be looking at coming down the pipe. Then I'm going to chat a little bit more about our very busy weather pattern in the southern and eastern United States with some flooding and some severe weather possible. So we've got a lot to cover in today's video. Thank you so much for joining me this morning. I'm blessed to have you here. Let me share my screen with you and talk about the unprecedented start to hurricane season. And unprecedented meaning we are talking probably not just one, but maybe two or more storms coming off of the coast of Africa. The Cape Verdes is what we call them. Typically, this area does not really get going until maybe later in July or August. Well, we now have a Tropical Storm Bret, which is one of the earliest to form so far east. We may likely have another one here in the next couple of days, being designated an Invest AL93, but likely to get the name Cindy here in a couple of days. And I'm going to keep an eye on the East Coast here. Probably nothing tropical at this point, but maybe an impactful low pressure system heading up the coastline. And we're going to take a look at what some of the models are trying to do with that, bringing moisture up the East Coast here later this week and through the weekend and even in the next week as well. So for those of you that wanted summer to get here, well, it is coming. Those of you in the South, though, I know you need a break from these storms, and we're going to continue to have them in the forecast over the next several days. Here's a look at the tropics, and you can see why things are off to such a quick start. Water temperatures are running much warmer than average over the eastern Atlantic and over the main development region and into the southern Gulf and Caribbean, while we do have an area off the East Coast that is running below average. Now, water temperatures off the East Coast do warm up pretty quickly, so just because they're below average doesn't mean we're not going to see anything. It just means for the short term, it's going to be a little bit less likely to see storms developing quickly in here. Maybe they're going to be more slowly to develop. So that's what I'll be keeping an eye on. But water temperatures across the main development region, and that's that region right over here. Let me see if I can get you guys a good color here. I don't know if it's going to give me a good color, but right in here is the main development region, running about 2 to maybe 3 degrees Celsius above average, which is what you would typically see here later in the month of August. So that is why we're seeing August-like development out in here. Here's a look at the water vapor imagery, and you can see this shows you kind of a general area of moisture across the Atlantic. Let me bring my cursor back up. Sorry, it's so slow here. But you can see this is our tropical storm right here. This is Bret. Right behind it, we've got Cindy. It's a slightly lower latitude than that. And then we've got yet another series of waves moving off of the African coastline that are going to track in this general direction. So things are lined up and ready to go here. Now, across the rest of the Atlantic, we do have a subtropical ridge of high pressure in place here. This high pressure ridge is what's steering these systems westward towards the islands. We do have a large upper level low over the southeastern United States, and that is bringing strong wind shear to areas of the Gulf of Mexico, which will keep things from developing there, as well as over the southwest Atlantic. The upper level low is actually going to spin off a trough in here, which is forecast to move east and southeastward. What that's going to do is it's going to break down a region of high pressure and allow an opening where storm systems, once they get into this region, have to make a decision. They're either going to continue on to the west, or they're going to be recurving off to the north or north and east. And what's really going to make that determining factor as to if they turn or not is going to be how vertically stacked these storm systems get. Do they align so that the circulation near the ground is, or near the ocean water, is lined up with where it is way above the ocean? If it's not lined up with it, then what's going to happen is they're probably going to continue to move westward. However, if they do organize and grow in size and do become better vertically stacked, then what will happen is these winds off to the north and west from this trough will basically take the storm system and draw it northward and make that recurve. Both of these right now are certainly what we want to see in the U.S. They keep storms out of the Gulf of Mexico, but nothing is really a guarantee this far out either. So just an aside there for you guys to see. Now you can look at the Eastern Atlantic. You can see Tropical Storm Bret here. Plenty of moisture in place here. There's some dry air off to the north of the system. Cindy's actually in a better spot for future Cindy. I'm calling it Cindy already. It's going to take a couple days probably to get there. It's in a better spot in that it's already got moisture in place from Bret. So that it doesn't have dry air in the way of it, doesn't really have that much wind shear in the way of it. So it's actually going to have a better chance, I think, to develop here in a couple of days. And then you can see more large waves coming off of Africa, nothing organized at this point. And the models are not going to forecast them very well until we start to see some organization. It's a chicken and egg kind of thing, which came first. However, when I see this kind of storm development over Africa, it makes me think we're probably not done with the storms after this second one here. So we may see a D storm forming in the next couple of weeks. This map is a little bit deceiving, I think. Let me reload it and see if there's there's a new forecast out from the National Hurricane Center. Makes you think this disturbance is going to swallow up Bret. That's not going to be the case. This is just the area where it will possibly develop into a depression or storm. This is Bret, Tropical Storm. This is AL93 Future Cindy. National Hurricane Center has it moving west-northwest with a 70% chance of developing into at least a tropical depression by Thursday morning, and an 80% chance of becoming a depression or a storm beyond that towards the second half of this week into the weekend. And the area of development will be very close to where Bret is developed, maybe a little bit farther north. Here's a look at Bret right now, and you can see the storm system itself. The center of it's actually right in here. All of the storms are on the east side of it, with a few exceptions here on the north side. So it's kind of missing. It's kind of exposed here. Does not look like it's a big storm, but it doesn't look like one that's going to intensify quickly here. So that's kind of the main point I'm going with. There is a little bit of wind shear in the way of it here. There's some dry air in place over the north and west. And both of those are kind of working against quick development. So despite forecasts of this to become a hurricane, it may take its sweet time getting there. I'm going to use the analogy with me personally. I've got a dad bod, and I work very hard in the gym, but my diet isn't always great, and I sit a lot with my day job, so I have to work a lot harder to stay physically fit. And while I don't look like I'm maybe that physically fit, I am working hard at it. Well, Bret's going to be doing the same thing. It's going to be working hard, but it's going to be dealing with some uphill battles here to really get it to strengthen quickly. So not going for my bodybuilder phase, and I'm not making fun of myself or any other dads out there. It's just, it's what happens when you hit your 40s. You really do have to work hard. But when I go to the doctor, everything looks great. When I get on the scale, it doesn't. That's just life. But I'll continue to work hard because God put me here on earth to be healthy and be there for my family and children. And that is a big motivating factor for me to keep doing what I'm doing, despite what I may weigh on the scale, if that makes sense. I tell people that I'm the right weight. I'm just not the right height for it. So there you go. Anyway. Tropics, we are still looking at Bret here on the infrared. You can see those storms blowing up well to the west of the center and well to the north and east. It's a large storm. It's going to grow some more, but it's not going to grow very quickly. So I think we're going to see some modest intensification today into the night tonight. And it is possible we could have ourselves a hurricane here in a couple of days. You can see the National Hurricane Center forecast does have the storm continuing west-northwest and becoming a hurricane here either tomorrow night or Thursday morning. They have backed off. The forecast from yesterday had this farther north as a hurricane, moving through the Leeward Islands and even the southern Windward Islands, and then approaching Puerto Rico as a hurricane. I am believing that that is probably less likely to happen, and that we're just dealing with a tropical storm that will start to weaken and feel wind shear by the time it gets into the Caribbean here on Friday and continuing westward. So it's very possible that over the weekend we see Bret become just a depression or even a degenerated tropical wave. And I'll show you why when we take a look at wind shear in just a minute here. Forecast guidance continues to trend on that southern track. It is seeing that Bret is not yet vertically stacked. It is seeing that it's a lot less likely to make that right turn now. So we're going to continue that forecast where it goes into the Caribbean. It's shifted somewhat farther to the south and west over the Central Islands here, which is better news for those of you in the Virgin Islands and Puerto Rico. But it's unlikely by the time we get here that we even really have a named system. It's possible we have some kind of piece of junk that tries to hold together, but it's not super likely that we have a hurricane in the Western Caribbean. So if you're on the east coast of the U.S., this is certainly better news than maybe what we were looking at a couple of days ago. The GFS ensemble also has that track where, generally speaking, we have a tropical storm moving into the Caribbean right at about 15 north and continuing west or west-northwestward, and maybe even dying or bringing moisture into Central America or possibly Mexico. The European ensembles, a little bit interesting when we get over here, but overall the average of the track takes it into what we call the graveyard of the Caribbean. This time of the year, there's too much wind shear. There's dry air coming off of the mountains of Colombia and Central America, and both of those typically lead to a weaker storm system or even a dying storm system. We'll keep an eye on it, though. There are a couple of ensemble solutions that maybe in about 7 or 8 days do try to bring this a little bit farther northward. Maybe it gets picked up by the upper level low. If it does get into the Gulf of Mexico, I will say that wind shear is going to be relatively high. So we're probably not looking at any kind of major system, but rather a rainmaker for Florida and parts of the southeastern United States, which I know we don't want to hear either. So overall, our model guidance is trending weaker. It's showing a tropical storm or maybe a low-end Category 1 hurricane in about 48 hours. That would put it at early in the day on Thursday, and then weakening some by Friday. And you can see overall a gradual weakening of the storm system. There is an outlier, the H-Wharf. I'll show you that, but I don't necessarily buy into it. I don't think we're looking at a major hurricane. Very interesting to see how it's just taking off right now, despite the fact that we just don't have a storm system that's looking very healthy on satellite. Here's a look at the global, the GFS model, and you can see our storm system, Bret here, and then the next disturbance behind it. They are generally tracking west-northwestward. You can see potential landfall coming early in the day on Friday over the central islands here, over the northern Leeward Islands. Here's potential Cindy. The pressure is 1,007. That may put it at tropical depression or even tropical storm strength. And then we see the GFS, which no longer takes this system east of Bermuda. It has it weakening as it moves into the Central Caribbean. Cindy actually has a better chance of surviving some, but there's going to be increasing wind shear. So Cindy's going to turn this way, and what's left of Bret's going to be moving towards Honduras by early next week. There is another system to watch as well, but it doesn't look like the GFS wants to develop it into much at this point. The Pacific side actually looks like it's going to be more active here in a few days and into next week. So at the time, we're not looking at anything really too intense. We're just looking at storms that are going to end up getting a name, and we're going to see rain moving into the Caribbean islands here and maybe into Puerto Rico as well, or I'm sorry, Bermuda as well. Now on the East Coast, we will potentially have something spinning up in here. The GFS shows it next week. Other models show it this week near North Carolina. Probably not going to get a name at this point, but something we're going to keep an eye on because it'll enhance moisture up the eastern seaboard. It may increase wind as well, as we have a bit of a pressure gradient here on the eastern seaboard, but a very low chance that I think we get a named storm out of it, but something I'll be keeping an eye on for you guys just to spin up here at this point, heading into the end of the month of June. Beyond that, again, operational models are not really to be trusted once we get beyond about 168 hours. This is 300 hours from now. And you can see it still looks like the eastern seaboard is going to have unsettled weather, and we're still going to have potentially a couple of low pressure systems to track here over the central Atlantic. So classic El Nino, where storm tracks are likely to be much more active in the central Atlantic and less active closer to the US, especially this time of the year. But the difference this time is that water temperatures are running hot. So we are seeing all of these named storms, but we're not seeing anything that really threatens the U.S. So that's classic El Nino, and that's the battleground we're going to continue to watch here as the season wears on, especially in July and August. So anyway, the European model, which was not really developing Bret very quickly, does have Bret on the map. It has potential Cindy here. You can see just 2 tropical cyclones, with Bret dying by the time we get to the weekend, Cindy continuing to slowly intensify and then weaken some as it moves up towards into the southeast of Bermuda. And then with this high pressure zone here off of Newfoundland, it actually has the system kind of stalling in here and still a weak system here by the end of next week. And that is very possible. If it survives wind shear, then this high pressure shifts east. Then we'll have to keep an eye on Cindy for Bermuda and maybe up into Atlantic Canada, but not until the beginning of July, which is still such a far time off from now to really make a reliable forecast. Here's a look at the German icon model. You can see Bret weakening when it hits the Caribbean, and then that's it, really. It actually gets swallowed up by the gyre here over Colombia. Here is future Cindy. This is Friday night into Saturday, already making that turn. This is what's left of Bret here over the southwestern Caribbean. Maybe a weak system near Honduras by next Monday. Here's Cindy, which is already beginning to weaken by the time it moves off to the north and moves towards Bermuda. And here's probably the next system on the map, which looks like it may be a depression or a weak storm, maybe following the track of Bret here in about a week or just over a week from now. So yeah, you can see what's left of Bret. The icon tries to recycle it a bit here in the Western Caribbean where it could be more favorable, but it's not developing it very quickly at this point. So I'm not super concerned about it at this point. And on the East Coast, You can see the icon does have low pressure developing near Wilmington here over the next 2 days, and then just kind of sitting and bringing higher winds over the Delmarva and up into about New York City and Long Island. Higher winds here, but not a strong chance that it is going to develop into any kind of subtropical system. Something we'll be watching, though. Now, the HWRF model, this is a hurricane model. This is the one that, for whatever reason, some of the hurricane forecasts are still factoring in. I just don't see this happening, though. It's got a Category 3 hurricane, 125 miles per hour here by Friday morning. It's got it strengthening quickly, and I just don't see this happening. This just seems way overdone at this point. Cindy, it's probably a little more reasonable with here. It's got a tropical storm following, and then probably going to make the right turn. But I just don't see this happening where we have a big hurricane coming through St. Croix and just to the east of Puerto Rico later this weekend. And you can see it zoomed in here. It's just, I mean, it's already starting off too strong. It's got pressures down below 1,000 millibars and just takes that idea and just runs with it. So again, we always have models that sometimes get way too aggressive, and this is one of those that has that bias. It's got it coming through near Martinique and then into the Northeast Caribbean and then making a right turn. More than likely, it's going to stay weaker and move farther to the south. Now, the HAFS tropical model, while it does strengthen this into a hurricane, that's it. It kind of maxes things out here. Interestingly, over the weekend, it's got the pressure just below 980 with a hurricane south of Puerto Rico. But then after that, very quickly, the pressure's starting to come up. And by the time it gets south of Haiti, I don't think it's going to survive by next Monday. And here's a reason why. If you look at the GFS, let me make this a little bit smaller for you guys here. Whoops, I think I messed that up. All right, here we go. This is the relative humidity field up at 500 millibars. You can see the center of the storm right here. Look what's in the way of it, though. Quite a bit of dry air. And the center of the storm continues to be heavily weighted to the east with dry air just to the west of it on the GFS model. And this is why the storm is going to struggle. In fact, Cindy, or future Cindy, may actually have a better shot because it's got all this moisture here, but there's a bit of a dry area right between the two systems. So even Cindy could struggle here by the end of the week. And you can see how elongated things get at this point. Just doesn't look like a storm that's going to be very healthy. It's going to struggle. It may strengthen, but it's going to be a slow strengthening process. And then here's future Cindy, and then here's the next wave, and you can see we go through pushes of dry air in between the two. So, you know, we will have development, but it's not going to be anything rapidly strengthening at this point. At least I certainly don't believe so. And when we get to the Caribbean here, I'll make it bigger for you guys again. You can see the humidity here. When we get to the weekend, just looks like everything gets quickly sheared here at this point. Yeah, there's moisture there, but everything is sheared quickly. And yeah, it's pretty moist over the Central Caribbean by next Tuesday, but you just don't see really any kind of circulation that's going to survive here. Here's the reason why. Wind shear over the Western Caribbean and over the Central Caribbean is very high. Where our system Bret is going to be moving in, it's a little bit lower, but then it starts picking up here by the end of the week. And you can see how it's just a constant battle between wind shear, dry air, and then slightly lower wind shear on the southern side of our storm. And wind shear out of the north and west by the weekend looks to be strong enough to cause this system to steadily weaken and maybe even no longer become a circulation and just a remnant tropical wave by early next week. So here's a look at the ensembles from the European. You can see this is Bret, this is future Cindy, and here's the area to watch later this week over the Carolinas and Virginia, which may briefly become something tropical, maybe not. And as we get to Sunday and Monday, you can see the chance of a lingering depression fades off into the sunset as we get to the weekend. And even like with Cindy here, we see a fading storm system by next Tuesday. Here's the next one behind it. I think Danny's the next name on the list. And you can see that one has a brief window where it could develop. And then by later next week, kind of the same thing. Wind shear takes over. And so you get multiple names being used up, and it pads the stats very well. It shows us that the Atlantic is very warm, but it also gives you guys the impression that there really is no need to panic at this point. Just because we see storm after storm coming off doesn't mean there's any really threat to the United States at this point. So just padding stats at this point. Here's the overall chance of seeing anything, and this is Bret. Probably doesn't survive south of Jamaica. Here's perhaps a weak system near the East Coast. Here's Cindy, which doesn't look like it survives before it gets to Bermuda, and then we have development on the eastern side here in the Pacific Ocean, which I can show you guys a likely storm system, which we will need to watch in Mexico around Acapulco and the Riviera, and then eventually up into the Baja. So we'll talk about that a little bit more in coming days. The control of the European, you can see our storm system as it moves into the Caribbean. It just hits a brick wall here Saturday night south of Jamaica. Here's our next system, perhaps Cindy, and you can see that one pretty much starts to fade when it gets east of the island of Bermuda, but we'll keep an eye on it just in case it tries to hold itself together and maybe come up to the eastern side of Nova Scotia here, but that is going to be at the beginning of the month of July. And then you can see we may have a weak system here over the Outer Banks sometime here later this week in early next week. Nonetheless, it's going to produce some gusty winds on the east coast here of the United States. Let's see if I can even show you guys that. I'm not in the right area here. Let's look at the mid-Atlantic here. There we go. And you can see regardless of whether or not something tries to get going here, we do have gusty winds around the Hampton Roads, Virginia Beach area, gusts maybe to 40 miles per hour, moving up the Jersey Shore here tomorrow evening, and then gusty winds on the Jersey Shore. So we could have a bit of coastal flooding in Cape May, Wildwood, Atlantic City, Barnegat, all the way up to Long Island here with wind gusts over 30 miles per hour. It may feel like a tropical depression, but we're probably not going to see that really happen at this point. All right, we're going to talk severe weather real quick here. We did have some tornadoes, pretty big ones actually, on the Alabama, Mississippi, Florida Gulf Coast. Very rare to see tornadoes down here of this intensity when we're not dealing with a tropical system, but that was the case. We also had wind reports over portions of East New Orleans and lots of hail being reported as well in that area, and severe winds over parts of northern Florida, some severe weather on the Florida Peninsula. And then interestingly, we did have severe weather over the foothills and Piedmont region in North Carolina, lots of funnel clouds yesterday around Lake Norman, and then severe winds all the way up to the Shenandoah Valley and on into central Maryland and even western Pennsylvania. And it may look a little bit like that again here today, where we do have perhaps a slight risk that we see some severe wind. There's actually, I think, a little bit more of a marginal risk coming up the East Coast all the way to the Outer Banks. We could see a brief tornado or two somewhere in here based on some of the tropical guidance or model guidance I've seen. But overall, we're looking at a shrinking area of severe weather, mainly for Louisiana and southern Mississippi and Alabama, which do not need any more severe weather. We do have a chance for tornadoes, 2% across this area, a 15% wind threat, and a 5% including most of Florida and southern Georgia, and there will be a 5% hail threat. The next area that we're going to keep an eye on is the northern plains. We could have some tornadoes, some wind, and severe hail over the Dakotas into eastern parts of Montana and Wyoming, maybe even stretching down into southern parts of Nebraska. So still a lot of folks are going to see severe weather, but the overall trend is improving. Tomorrow, we don't have organized severe weather for Louisiana. We still do have a risk for severe weather in Florida and the southeast. And we do have a slight risk tomorrow from Wyoming and Nebraska down into the Big Sky country of Texas. 2% tornado chance in eastern Colorado, 15% wind threat over the four-state region here, as well as over the southern plains, 5% in other areas. And we could see maybe some larger hail over eastern Colorado, western Kansas, and Nebraska, eventually getting down to places like Wichita Falls. As we get to Thursday, we do have a marginal risk in here, which then will grow into probably a slight to maybe enhanced risk area here by Friday over the same region. And then Saturday, that shifts east and could impact Omaha for the College World Series games on Saturday. Could include parts of Missouri. We may eventually see this shifting towards the Mississippi Valley here by Sunday of this upcoming weekend. So something to keep an eye on. And here's why. Oh, sorry about that. Here's the upper level pattern. And you can see over the southeast, we have a cutoff low and weakening wind flow aloft, which means a less likelihood that we see organized severe wind and tornado threat. But we see multiple disturbances coming out of the southwest and moving up into the central and northern plains. And by Sunday, we do see enhanced winds over Iowa and northern parts of Missouri. And this could lead to some severe weather in Illinois and Indiana late in the weekend, maybe in the Ohio Valley as well. But then those winds will start to weaken as we get into Monday and Tuesday next week. But the pattern recycles. This is a pretty common pattern here for June, where we do see the threat for severe weather shifting to the central and northern parts of the United States and shifting away from the southeast. This is our death ridge producing triple-digit heat over much of Texas, and that'll shift into Louisiana here as well. We had a 115-degree high in Laredo, Texas yesterday. Really no signs that that's going to really relieve itself anytime soon. Here's the surface map. You can see it's going to stay wet over the southeast. Moisture shifts northward into Maryland and Pennsylvania over the next couple of days. Wet up the east coast here as our low pressure system continues to spin right on through Friday and even into Saturday. The northeast looks pretty wet. Next storm comes up from the plains into the upper Midwest here over the weekend, shifts east into Illinois and Wisconsin, Saturday night into Sunday. We could see maybe an area of stronger storms shifting from Arkansas down into Mississippi and Alabama by next Sunday night. That looks to be sort of like a repeat of last weekend. However, the wind flow aloft is going to be weaker, so I don't think we're going to see as much intensity with those storms. But nonetheless, it's going to be hot in the south. It's going to be unsettled on the east coast, and we're going to see more rain and thunderstorms over the upper Midwest and the northern Rockies and Plains. That track continues here, where we may finally see some heavier cells moving into Ontario and Michigan here later on next week. But again, that's kind of far off. A lot of you folks wanted to see summer. It's been such a cool start in the east. Well, here's summer. You look at the dew points, and they are in the 60s and low 70s across the entire southeast and shifting up the east coast. Dew points are going to be pushing 70 here around DC, Baltimore, and Philly here by the end of this week. And air you can wear continues into the weekend with dew points well into the 60s. So here's your summer. It's just going to be flat out muggy and wet and unsettled. And that continues into next week, where dew points remain in the 60s through at least the middle part of next week. Maybe some relief coming towards the latter part of the week. But it is definitely going to be summerly here, summer-like, whatever that word is, right on into next week. Real quick, we'll look at the NAM model. We'll see storms developing and moving across East Texas and Louisiana. They'll probably be severe here this afternoon. New Orleans could get hit hard with some severe weather here around 3 or 4 o'clock. Then that moves out this evening. We get a break. We see storms popping up over West Texas and Oklahoma here with the heating of the day tomorrow afternoon, maybe eyeing Austin and San Antonio. More storms up across parts of Colorado and the Texas and Oklahoma panhandle. Could have a complex of severe weather in areas that have been hard hit here. That's not going to be till 5 or 6 in the morning, though, on Thursday, and that continues moving south and east. I gotta move quicker here. I'm sorry, folks. You can see storms over the Dakotas and over the prairies of Canada here over the next few days. These will continue, and slowly we see this boundary shifting east with additional rounds of showers and storms, heavy rainfall, severe wind, severe hail, and probably a few tornadoes in here. You can see that in the Dakotas here. Wednesday night into Thursday morning. Here's a look at the southeast, and we're not going to see any widespread severe weather, but there will be active weather over Florida, over the central Gulf Coast here today. More showers and storms gyrating with our upper low near Atlanta. We'll see a lot of rain over the Carolinas and eastern Tennessee here over the next couple of days. Probably a lot of thunderstorms in the eastern parts of these states, a lot of rain in the western part of these states. More action tomorrow night over Georgia, South Carolina, shifting up into the Lake Norman region, and the pattern continues to repeat itself Thursday, although it looks to be busier farther north and east as our upper low does start moving a little bit more to the north and east on Thursday. And you'll see that in the mid-Atlantic region here. That'll be pretty wet, going to be pretty unsettled over North Carolina, eastern Tennessee, over Virginia, and over central and eastern Kentucky. Nashville could have some storms here this evening. As we get to tomorrow, it's going to be a total washout over Virginia, rounds of maybe strong storms moving through eastern North Carolina, rain across parts of West Virginia, and that eventually shifts north. And the Delmarva and Maryland could see heavy rain tomorrow night. We could see some heavy rain, gusty winds over New Jersey and southeastern PA overnight tomorrow night into Thursday morning. So it looks nasty on Thursday. Eventually, that does move up into the north and east as well. We do have a moderate risk for flooding today and tonight from Greenville and the upstate of South Carolina up through the Pisgah Forest to about Boone, North Carolina. Slight risk for flooding as far east as Burlington, as far south as Fayetteville, Columbia, down to the eastern suburbs of Atlanta, and a threat for some flooding as well on the central Gulf states. As we get to tomorrow, we still see a slight risk for flooding in these kind of the same areas here from northern Florida up through southwest Virginia, as well as a threat for some flooding over the plains. As we get to the day on Thursday, the areas of flooding remain kind of in the same spot here. And then we see a lesser chance for flooding, but it does move up the spine of the Appalachians towards the Poconos here on Friday. A bigger chance for flooding here in Montana and Dakotas on Friday. Saturday, that shifts into the prairies of Canada, into Minnesota. And we continue to see a marginal risk for flooding in the Northeast on Saturday. Here's a look at total rainfall. You can see it's going to pile up in the same places over the next 10 to 12 days. Very heavy rain over the eastern U.S., very heavy rain from Montana into the prairies of Canada. Nothing for the Southwest or South Texas, very little over parts of the Arklatex region. And we will see some rain across the lower lakes, but I don't think it's going to be a lot. Certainly not enough to put a huge dent in our local drought that we're dealing with. Here's rain through the end of the week, 3 to 6 inches in many places in the Southeast, 2 to 4 in Florida. Just really looks nasty, and that wet pattern continues into next week. Jackson on back to the Arklatex, we'll see a quieter pattern as it gets hotter. We'll see a lot of rain migrating up the mid-Atlantic region as well in the next 2 to 3 days. And it will continue to shift northward with amounts over an inch expected around New York and Albany, New York here by the weekend, and heavy amounts over parts of the Northeast. Eastern Tennessee and Southeast Kentucky will get significant rain. Ohio and West Virginia will get some more rain as well. Nothing going to be too substantial, but it will help out. You can see the official forecast from the National Weather Service shows amounts as high as 10 inches here in places like Avery County, North Carolina, and over 5-6 inches in the Pisgah Forest. Raleigh could see 3, Charlotte about 4, Columbia about 4, Atlanta about 2 to 3. So a lot of rain coming just between now and the end of the day on Thursday. And you can see the Northeast is going to be pretty darn wet here between this late week storm and more moisture moving up early in the week next week with a front approaching later next week. Lots of rain as well in the north central U.S., 2 to 4 inches of rain for many states here. Omaha is going to see about a 1/4 inch of rain and then more over the weekend. And this wet pattern continues to recycle itself as storms take the same track. It'll stay cool across the west, coolish across the southeast due to the cloud cover, and then hot across Texas and the plains. Heat builds over eastern Canada here later this week, while it will turn cooler over the northeast here. We will start to warm up in the northwest over the weekend, turning cooler over the northern plains, turning hotter over the southern plains. And overall, the next 10 days will stay cool over the southwest, hot over the southern plains, hot across central and eastern Canada, as well as northwestern Canada, and slightly cooler than average where our upper low remains in place from the Tennessee Valley into the interior of the Northeast. Thank you all so much for watching. So much to talk about today. More videos coming this week, more analysis on the tropics, more about flooding, more severe weather. If you did enjoy this video, and I really pray that you did, I really would appreciate if you could subscribe to my channel and share it with your friends. We'll have updates throughout the day today with any severe weather and any tropical changes coming. And I thank you for your time today. As always, I want to glorify God as a Christian man who gives me the ability to do this every day. Every day is a blessing for me, and God has blessed me with this spiritual gift where I can share with you the weather, and also to share with you what God means to me. I was on a bit of a Bible study on Twitter the other night with some of the other weather communities, some other Christians, Mitch West, one of them, a few others, Norman Smith. And one of them had mentioned the Reed Timmer saying, if those of you know Reed Timmer, I really hope you do, never stop chasing. But we were talking about chasing God and glorifying God. And a great saying that came out, never stop chasing God. And that goes all the way back to the Old Testament, 1 Chronicles 16:8. Give thanks unto the Lord, call upon his name, make known his deeds among the people. Sing unto him, sing psalms unto him, talk ye of all his wondrous works. Glory ye in his holy name, let the heart of them rejoice that seek the Lord. Seek the Lord in his strength, seek his face continually. Remember his marvelous works that he hath done, his wonders, and the judgments of his mouth. O ye seed of Israel, his servant, ye children of Jacob, his chosen ones. He is the Lord our God, his judgments are in all the earth. Seek the Lord and his strength, seek his face continually. We're all chasing a dream, whether or not you are a believer, whether or not you're a Christian or a Jew or someone else. No matter what you're doing, you're seeking something. I was seeking the Lord. I didn't know it, though, until I was about 30 years old. I was seeking something greater. I wanted some change. I wanted a purpose in life. I was getting burned out in my 20s. I was hanging out with people that were not really uplifting. They were my friends, but there were also people who unfortunately were just not believers, and nothing against you if you are not a believer, but they were, if I was going to continue on that track, I was not going to be in a good spot in my 30s and 40s. Thank the Lord, though, that the window opened and I was able to meet my wife, meet other Christian folks, meet people who have been able to uplift me, all because they never stopped seeking the Lord, never stopped chasing the Lord. They sought his strength. And eventually I was able to grow with my relationship. And I'm still growing. If you're not growing, you're dying. Everyone's a tomato. You're either ripening or you're dying. Well, I don't want to be dying. I mean, I want to be dead to sin, but I don't want to be dying. So I continue to seek the Lord every day and his wonders and the judgments of his mouth, because there will be a day when Jesus will come again, and we can either choose to be saved by him and eternally have life, or unfortunately, the alternative doesn't look good. And whether or not you believe that, I pray that you do. I'm not going to judge you if you don't. That's not who I am. Because if people had judged me back when I was not a believer, I would not be where I am today. I'd not be successful in this venue. I would just not be in a good spot. But thank the Lord that he's shown himself through his son, Jesus Christ. I was able to accept that gift, and I pray that you are as well. Thank you all so much. If you need any prayers, feel free to leave them in the comments. I love to pray for you and with you and over you. And if you could pray for me and my family as well. We're going through some stuff right now. I very much appreciate that. Thank you for watching today, and you all be safe. We'll talk to you again tomorrow. God bless you.